Part 2. I Can See the Laws of Things. Author, Yitiao Xuanhuan. Chapter 11. Lin En nodded, didn't say anything, and followed her to pick out a few items. Hello, boss. At this moment, a middle-aged man in a suit and leather shoes with a big belly walked in from the door. The receptionist in the store immediately bowed to the middle-aged man, with a respectful look on his face. The shopkeeper greeted him with a smile and said, "Boss, you are a little late today. Is there something that delayed you?" Every time this time comes, their boss will inspect all his stores. Although their boss is not impressive in appearance, he is a business tycoon with assets of over 100 million. His industries involve clothing, catering, furniture and other fields. He can be said to be a successful person. The middle-aged man glanced at him, sat down at the counter, took out his cell phone, and said with a smile, "Come here, let me show you a photo I secretly took." The store manager walked over curiously and saw a profile of a young man on their boss's cell phone. The most eye-catching thing was the shining golden medal on his chest. The store manager was shocked. "Grandmaster." The boss nodded and said, "That's right. A grandmaster in his 20s. Usually, you don't even say you have met such a person, you can't even touch his shadow. I was lucky today, I met him on the road, a master. And so young." Seeing the boss's interest, the store manager was also very surprised. A person who can become a grandmaster in his 20s must be a peerless talent cultivated by big forces. Although they have grandmasters in Jianghai City, all of them are old men in their 60s. Their growth has reached the upper limit, and the future of this young man is simply unimaginable. But, why do I always feel like I've seen it somewhere before? The boss smiled enviously and said, "Hey, poor me, Zhangpeng Biao, started from scratch. Although my assets are over 100 million, all of my sons are cowards. Even if one of them can reach half of this young man, I'm afraid I can't even dream of it." Wake up with a smile. The store manager lowered his head and said, "Boss, why don't you find a strong teacher for the young masters?" Zhangpeng Biao sighed, "It's not like I haven't looked for them. But those extraordinary warriors and mages with some strength are all very proud, but they think that my children are too useless and tarnish their reputation." He turned to look at the man in the photo on his mobile phone and said sadly, "It would be great if I could get to know this young master." At this moment, a calm voice came from the side. "Check out." Zhangpeng Biao was startled and raised his head, and saw the young man standing in front of the counter. Instantly, his eyes widened. He looked at Lin An's face in astonishment, then lowered his head and looked at the young grandmaster he secretly photographed above the cell phone photo. Wearing a black vest and sweatpants, they look exactly the same except that they don't wear medals. There was a loud bang in his brain. It can't be such a coincidence, right? You are. Zhangpeng Biao quickly stood up from the chair, looked at Lin An in shock, and said, "Are you the grandmaster outside just now?" As soon as this was said, all the receptionists in the clothing store showed astonishment. The girl who was standing behind Lin An and helping Lin An hold the clothes he bought was even more stunned. "Zone, Grandmaster." Lin An nodded and said, "It's me, what can I do?" There is nothing hard to admit. Many people outside just saw his medal, and he has nothing to hide. Hearing Lin An's direct admission, Zhangpeng Biao felt his brain buzzing, and he felt a little at a loss. "I was talking to a grandmaster, and if I said I wasn't nervous, that would be a lie." Zhangpeng Biao quickly came to his senses and realized that he had lost his composure. He quickly extended his hand to Lin An and said, "I am the boss here. My surname is Zhang and my given name is Peng Biao. It is really a great honor for a grandmaster to come to my shop. This is my business card." Lin An took the business card, looked at the series of titles on it, and then raised his head to glance at Zhangpeng Biao, who was embarrassed. "No wonder he looked familiar when I saw him. I saw him a few times on TV a few years ago, so I have some impressions. The Zhang Group is very famous in Jianghai City, and is considered the leader among the chambers of commerce in Jianghai City. Lin En nodded, shook hands with him, and said, "I've seen you on TV several times before, Boss Zhang." As soon as these words came out, Zhang Pengbiao was extremely excited. He never expected that this young grandmaster would actually look familiar to him. His heart was instantly inspired. "May I ask the grandmaster's name?" he asked quickly. Lin smiled and said, "Lin." Zhang Pengbiao read Lin En's name silently. But he couldn't remember where he had heard of it, but then he thought about it, the world is so big, and there are so many masters that he has never heard of. But without exception, they are not comparable to people like me who only have a little money. Grandmaster Lin, it's a pleasure to meet you. It's a pleasure to meet you. Zhang Pengbiao was extremely enthusiastic. At this moment, Zhang Pengbiao accidentally glanced at the clothes in the receptionist's hand. He recognized at a glance that they were all second-hand goods, clothing that needed to be disposed of at a cheap price. He glanced at the dull expression on the receptionist's face again, and he understood it instantly, and cried out in his heart. What kind of vision is this? This is a master. You actually took a master to choose the cheapest clothes. You are simply smearing my face as a boss. The master didn't say anything because he didn't care. But we can't not care. He frowned slightly and scolded. Xuanhuan, do you know who this person in front of you is? He actually took Master Lin to choose those rags. Why don't you help Master Lin pick a few suitable ones? The girl trembled with fear, and her face was extremely nervous. I'm sorry, Master Lin, I'll take you there right away. Lin En smiled and shook his head, put the badge in his hand on the counter, and then took a brown windbreaker from her hand and put it on, saying, "No, these are good." The moment he put on the windbreaker, the long hem of the windbreaker brushed the tip of the girl's nose. The girl looked at the smile on Lin En's face and felt her heart pounding instantly. She didn't think he was that handsome just now, but now, for some reason, she suddenly felt that the young man in front of her was really handsome. With that kind of demeanor and temperament, even if he was wearing the cheapest clothes, people couldn't take their eyes off him. And Zhang Pengbiao's eyes widened. Looking at the medal that Lin En casually placed on the counter. The Golden Grandmaster medal. He swallowed his saliva. That's right. Looking at the medal, it was definitely issued by the Marshal Hall, it couldn't be fake. He had a little doubt before, but now, he can confirm that this young man is really an officially certified Grandmaster. I can see the laws of things. Author, Yitiao Xianyue. Chapter 12. Lin En turned her head, looked at the dazzling array of clothes, and said, "Do you have clothes here for 15 or 16-year-old girls?" Zhang Pengbiao's eyes suddenly lit up and he asked, "Excuse me, Grandmaster Lin, are you giving it to your girlfriend?" Lin En shook his head and said, "Give it to my sister. If you have any, please help me pick a few more." "Yes. Yes. Of course there is. How could it not be?" Zhang Pengbiao said quickly. He immediately turned to look at the girl, frowned and said, "Why are you still standing there? Take Grandmaster Lin En to have a look." The girl came back to her senses, quickly stretched out her hand and said, "Lin, Grandmaster Lin, please come this way." Seeing Lin En follow the girl, Zhang Pengbiao immediately turned to look at the shop owner and said solemnly, "Quick! Call the company immediately and bring over the dress I customized for my daughter a few months ago." The shop owner was startled and said, "Boss, you are talking about the one that you spent more than 1 million yuan and specially asked the top designer from the northern city to customize it?" Zhang Pengbiao glared and said, "Nonsense, apart from that one, what else have I customized? Hurry up and go." The shop owner wiped the cold sweat from his head and quickly took out his mobile phone to call the head office, asking them to quickly deliver the only one-of-a-kind long dress in the world. Just these few. Lin En nodded, picked out a few clothes that suited King Ian, and was about to pay and leave. Zhang Pengbiao hurriedly stepped forward, grabbed Lin En, and said with a smile, "Master Lin, don't leave in a hurry. What a coincidence, our store just bought a beautiful long dress designed by a top designer today. I think if give that dress to your sister as a gift, she will love it." Lin En was about to say something, but Zhang Pengbiao was afraid that Lin En would refuse, so he quickly greeted her. Soon, the panting store manager ran out of the back door, holding the well-packaged long skirt specially taken from the head office. Lin En originally wanted to refuse, but when she opened the package, a long blue dress suddenly unfolded in front of her eyes. Beautiful! Beautiful! That kind of top-notch design is neither gorgeous nor rustic, it is just the right kind of beauty that is pleasing to the eye. Just by unfolding it, Lin En seemed to see an ethereal girl dancing gently in front of her. There is no woman who does not love beauty. If King Ian saw this long dress, I'm afraid she would be so stunned that she couldn't move her eyes away. Zhang Pengbiao looked at the expression on Lin En's face and asked nervously. "Grandmaster Lin, what do you think?" Lin En nodded and said, "Very good." Zhang Pengbiao laughed and said immediately, "Come here, pack it for Grandmaster Lin quickly." Lin En frowned slightly and said, "This dress must be very expensive." Naturally, there is still a lot of room to spend that million, so naturally it cannot be wasted on this dress. Zhang Pengbiao smiled boldly and said, "Grandmaster Lin, what are you talking about? It's an honor for me, Zhang, to see you here. This dress is my meeting gift to you." The receptionists around him looked shocked. They can tell at a glance that such a beautiful long dress cannot be bought without a million. Their boss was so polite to the person he met for the first time. Lin En said calmly, "When we first met, there was no reason for Boss Zhang to give me such a valuable thing." Zhang Pengbiao smiled and said, "Master Lin, what are you talking about? This dress really doesn't cost much. I just hope to make a friend with you. And you are giving it to your sister. As a brother, naturally I want to give my sister the best." Lin En looked at the smile on his face and knew what he was thinking. Seeing his identity as a master, do you want to make friends with him? Lin didn't like this kind of person, but he definitely didn't dislike him either. Because when you slowly start to stand in a high position, you will definitely encounter many such things. Lin En nodded and said, "Okay, I've got you as my friend. Please help me pack it up." He smiled inwardly. Is this considered a gift for me? Don't take things for free. It's not your style to continue to be pretentious. Zhang Pengbiao quickly helped Lin En pack it himself. He was also very excited inside. He was very afraid that Lin would not accept his gift. Because apart from money, he had nothing in his hands. In this case, he would be acquainted with Grandmaster Lin En. In the future, I will give you something one after another to cultivate the relationship. If you can really let your two children study hard with this master, that would be great. Zhang Pengbiao was very excited. Because this is the first time he has been online with a grandmaster. This is not the peaceful time of 100 years ago. For a billionaire like him, he is often coveted by many people. Kidnapping, extortion, and unfair competition are commonplace. If there is no one behind you, if they call a few warriors to tear down your entire company, you won't even dare to let go. Because in this world, power is the most abundant capital. Grandmaster Lin, is there anything else I can help you with? I'm familiar with this place, Zhang Pengbiao said with a smile. Lin En thought for a while, turned around and said, "Is there a furniture store nearby?" After the two left the store, they did not choose to take a ride. "The furniture store is not far from here, Just cross the intersection and you will get there. There is a red light ahead, and Zhang Pengbiao's attention is all on Lin En. He did not notice at all that a car was speeding towards them in the distance. The target has appeared. In the speeding car, an indifferent man said to the intercom expressionlessly. Very good. An indifferent voice came from the intercom. The employer hopes that we can make him die tragically, preferably on tomorrow's news, understand what I mean? The man lit a cigarette casually, picked up a long knife on the co-pilot, blew a long smoke ring, and said indifferently. I understand, it's just an ordinary person, I will cut his body into pieces. An indifferent voice came from the intercom, saying. We will mix in the crowd to meet you, but you have to be careful, the young man next to Zhang Pengbiao should be a warrior. The man said indifferently, I have killed many warriors. The next moment, he stepped on the accelerator hard. At this moment, Lin En and Zhang Pengbiao had already walked to the center of the intersection. The sound of a speeding car sounded instantly, and Zhang Pengbiao's face changed. He turned around suddenly and saw the speeding car. If he hadn't discovered that the car was targeting him at this time, he would have lived in vain for so many years. Not good, Zhang Pengbiao roared and turned around suddenly. In an instant, he saw in horror. On the other 3 roads, there was a car speeding towards him. This was a premeditated murder. The pedestrians on the sidewalk screamed. Because the next moment, the 4 cars rushed out of the crosswalk at a speed of 100 km per hour. Zhang Pengbiao was instantly frightened and sweated, and a look of horror appeared in his eyes. He even saw the indifferent eyes of the killers in those cars. Boom! 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 4 huge noises came. But the scene of blood and flesh flying did not appear. He opened his eyes, and in an instant, he was shocked. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. I can see the laws of things. Author, Yitiao Xuanhuan. Chapter 13. I didn't know when Lin En stood in front of him, his hands open to the left and right, his face was calm. But the horror was. The 4 cars seemed to hit an invisible wall of air, and 1 car was instantly crushed by the huge impact force. 1 car exploded directly, and violent flames burned fiercely. The other 2 cars actually flew high in the collision, and finally a second collision occurred heavily above their heads, and the 2 cars exploded with a bang. Zhang Pengbiao looked at the scene in shock. He even saw the unbelievable expressions of the killers in the cars when the 2 cars flew up. The pedestrians on the sidewalk looked at the young man standing in the explosion in horror, with great shock in their eyes. Lin En raised his head expressionlessly and said calmly. Are you okay? Zhang Pengbiao looked at him dully and said, Thank you Master Lin En for helping me. In the explosion just now, Lin En saw a figure rushing out from the crashed cars. Lin En raised his head and looked towards the other side of the road. He saw a man at least 1.9 meters tall, with tattoos all over his body and holding a long bone-cutting knife in his hand. He met his eyes fiercely. Who are you? How did you block my car? Lin En looked at him calmly, and the will of law lingering in his hand slowly disappeared. It was very simple. He just cast a solid air wall around himself at the moment when the car came. The will of law of stagnation stopped the air from flowing. The will of law of solidification made the air hard enough. The will of law of shaping turned the air into a barrier. These wheels of law were combined together and acted on the air to form a defense array comparable to magic. This is the application of the law. Not to mention a small car, even if a fierce beast came, it would have no effect. Lin En walked out of the burning scene slowly and said calmly. Do you need to know? The killer's expression was ferocious for a moment, and then he showed a sneer and said. Very good, in that case, I will personally send you and Zhang Pengbiao to hell. He suddenly stepped on the ground, and the ground was sunken more than 10 centimeters under the terrifying power of this kick. Seeing this scene, many people showed horrified expressions. That kind of terrifying power, this person's strength is at least above the intermediate warrior. Almost in an instant, he crossed a distance of hundreds of meters, and the terrifying speed even caused a sonic boom in the air. The knife in his hand was less than 1 meter away from Lin An's throat. Lin An was indifferent. "I haven't fought for a long time, and my hands and feet may be a little rusty. But it's just right to take this opportunity to develop the combat ability of my eye of law." At that moment, the killer suddenly saw the cold light in Lin An's eyes. The moment he was touched by those terrifying eyes, he suddenly felt his whole body instantly cold. It seemed that at this moment, he was not facing a person at all, but the entire sky. Who is this person? The next moment, Lin An stretched out his hand, his eyes flashed, and wheels of law appeared between his 5 fingers in an instant. The wheel of rule symbolizing power. The wheel of rule symbolizing acceleration. The wheel of rule symbolizing firmness. The 3 wheels of rule suddenly attached to his hand, and he clenched his fingers into a fist. There was a whoosh of air explosion. The moment he clenched his fist, scarlet blood instantly burst out from his fist as a wave of air. That was the release of blood, the power of the master that could only be unlocked after the force of a punch reached 100,000 kilograms. His power increase also climbed to 50 times in an instant. That's right. On the basis of more than 3,000 kilograms of force, the 3 wheels of rule were added, and the terrifying fist climbed 50 times. The power reached an astonishing 150,000 kilograms at that moment. And this 150,000 kilograms of force, driven by the will of the law of acceleration, went towards the killer at a speed of 500 meters per second. The speed has exceeded the speed of sound. Boom! Before the fist touched the killer, a huge sonic boom sounded in the air. The killer no longer had the killing intent in his eyes, but was replaced by fear. When Lin An punched, he felt it. He couldn't resist it. He definitely couldn't resist this oncoming punch. The first thing that collided head-on was Lin An's fist and his blade. With a click. At the moment of contact, his knife was directly shattered by the air wave blown by the fist wind. The broken blade flew everywhere. Seeing this scene, everyone's eyes showed a look of shock. One punch, breaking the blade. Such power is simply unimaginable. The next moment, the punch landed on the killer's chest. A big hole suddenly appeared on his clothes on the back, and his whole body bent up like a cooked shrimp. With a wow, he suddenly spat out a mouthful of scarlet blood, and his bulging eyes were engraved with an extremely shocked expression. Snap! Snap! He clearly felt that his ribs broke one by one when the fist landed on him. The mighty force traveled throughout his body, and his kidneys, heart, lungs, and stomach were all severely damaged by this punch. The power of this man! It was so terrifying that it was unimaginable. His body was pushed far away by the wind of the fist, rolled on the ground for more than 10 meters, and hit the wall heavily. His limp body kept twitching, and large mouthfuls of blood gushed out of his mouth. He raised his head tremblingly, looking at the young man with blood gushing out of his fist, and his eyes trembled as he said, "Master, Master." The next moment, his head tilted and fell to the ground. All the people at the intersection fell into silence, and they looked at the young man in disbelief. Lin An slowly retracted his fist and said calmly, "Call the police, and you can handle the rest yourself." After that, Lin An turned and walked in another direction. The crowd looked at the young man in shock and involuntarily made way for him. The sound of sirens came from afar. Zhang Pengbiao looked at Lin An's back as he went away. He suddenly came back to his senses, stood up excitedly, and said, "The power of a master. That's right. Absolutely right. He is definitely a master." According to the evening news, At about 2:21 this afternoon, a major traffic accident occurred in the center of Jianghai City Commercial Street. It is reported that this is a carefully prepared and planned murder. The target is Zhang Pengbiao, the chairman of our city's Zhang Group. This is the second murder he has suffered in a year. According to the on-site report, there were 4 modified cars driven by warriors, heading towards Zhang Pengbiao, but just when the car was about to run over the target, a shocking scene happened. In the room, King Ian lay in front of the TV, with her eyes wide open, nervously watching the surveillance record playing on the TV. I can see the laws of things. Author, Yitiao Xianyue. Chapter 14. I saw 4 cars speeding wildly, rushing straight towards the crowd in the middle of the intersection. But the next moment, the 4 cars seemed to have hit a solid fortress and exploded into flames instantly. Immediately afterwards, a figure slowly walked out of the flames. With one punch, the warrior who wanted to commit murder was sent flying 100 meters away. King Ian immediately covered her mouth, opened her big eyes, and looked at the blurry figure in disbelief. Although the face is difficult to see clearly. But as Lin An's younger sister, she instantly recognized that it was her brother. King Ian quickly turned on her mobile phone to surf the internet. On social platforms, the murder incident at noon today has already topped the trending search list in Jianghai City. Countless posts flooded the screen like crazy. Netizens are talking crazy. It's incredible. What kind of terrifying defense is that? Those are 4 cars traveling at hundreds of kilometers per hour. And that punch. It's so cool, isn't it? Wow, he's so handsome. We actually have such a handsome man in Jianghai City. I really want to marry him. I was at the scene at the time. You can't even imagine the shock at that time. It's strange to watch the scene. Visit the crowd with force. King Ian opened her eyes wide and kept scrolling through the posts. She saw that the top post titled 25-year-old Jianghai City's youngest grandmaster, detailed analysis had already received hundreds of thousands of likes. The number of retweets soared to 80,000 in just a few hours. The most shocking thing is that in that post, there was an official reply from Wu Dian. Although there is only a thumbs up emoji, the number of likes has soared to 100,000. Many of the replies below are asking, is that young man the new Grand Master of the Martial Palace? The number of replies has also soared to tens of thousands. King Ian covered her red face and said blankly, "Brother, is he really my brother? He's so handsome." Just then, the door opened. I'm back. I saw Lin An carrying big and small bags of things, walking in with a smile, putting them on the table, and said, "Haha, it's already so late." King Ian immediately stood up and stared at Lin's face. Lin An touched his cheek in confusion and said, "What's wrong? Is there something on my face?" "Elder brother." King Ian trotted up to him, grabbed his arm and pulled him to the sofa. She nervously pointed at the TV and said, "Is that person you?" Lin looked towards the TV. I saw that the TV was still showing the news about how I had solved those gangsters at noon. However, before Lin An left, he had already told Zhang Pengbiao that he did not want to appear on TV, so all the videos and pictures about his face were publicized and cannot be found on the internet. The surveillance video played on TV was blurry and his face could not be seen clearly. Lin An looked at King Ian's eager expression, dumbfounded. "It's me." I heard Lin admitted himself. King Ian's eyes suddenly opened wide, and she immediately jumped on Lin An's body in excitement and said, "So handsome. Brother. You are so handsome." She squirmed into Lin An's arms with bright eyes, quickly took out her mobile phone, and said with bright eyes, "Now the entire internet is talking about you, brother." Woo. Brother, do you know that there are already many girls saying that they will not marry unless you? It's so jealous. Lin didn't know whether to laugh or cry. It seems that every girl likes heroes, even my own sister seems to be no exception. Suddenly, King Ian seemed to remember something. She quickly turned over and sat up, her eyes shining brightly, and she said, "Brother, I saw a post on the internet. They said you are a grandmaster. What is going on?" Lin An touched his chin and said, "This." He smiled slightly, took out the simple box from his arms, and said, "Open it and take a look." King Ian carefully took the box, blinked, and slowly opened the box. In an instant, her eyes suddenly opened wide with an incredible expression in her eyes. Grandmaster badge. King Ian covered her goose egg-like mouth, stared at the badge in stunned silence, and said, "Brother, what's going on? Can't you only be able to exert more than 5,000 power? Why do you have a Grandmaster medal?" Lin An had no choice but to tell her everything about today's test. King Ian opened her cherry mouth and opened her big eyes, looking at Lin in disbelief. That cute look made Lin want to kiss her. "It's really incredible," King Ian said in shock. "Brother, you can actually see that terrifying amplification law from an ant. It's so powerful." Lin smiled silently and stretched out his hand. His hand moved slightly, and a card appeared between his two fingers. "Guess how many?" Looking at her brother's mysterious expression, King Ian's eyes lit up. She held her hands expectantly and said playfully, 100,000 yuan. Lin An shook his head and smiled, "Guess again." King Ian said in surprise, 1 million. Lin An shook his head and smiled, "Wrong, it's 5 million. As soon as these words came out, King Ian stayed in place in shock and said, 5 million. "Brother, don't lie to me. It's not good to lie to your sister." Lin An said with a smile, "The bonus is 1 million. After I saved that Zhangpeng Biao, he transferred another 4 million to me, so now there is a total of 5 million. Lin An put the card on the table, leaned on the sofa, smiled and said, "Hurry up and hide it in your little vault. This is all our family property now. Don't lose it." King Ian looked at the card, his whole body was stunned. 5 million. She has never seen so much money in her life. And now, it's in your own hands. She just felt that the card was as heavy as Mount Tai, and her eyes instantly turned red. "Brother, you are so awesome. I love you so much." Saying that, King Ian pounced forward like a butterfly and burrowed hard into Lin An's arms. A look of happiness on the verge of tears. My whole heart was pounding, as if it was about to jump out of my throat. Woohoo! I am so lucky to have such a great brother. Lin An said helplessly, "How old are you?" "You are still like a child. Go and cook some good dishes for me. If it doesn't taste good, why don't you ask?" King Ian immediately jumped up, saluted, and blinked, "Yes, brother, I promise to complete the mission." Lin laughed out loud. This was the first time in 2 years that he had laughed so heartily. After dinner, the sky gradually darkened. Lin An sat on the sofa, while King Ian held his arm and snuggled into his arms, holding popcorn and nervously watching the horror movie playing on the TV. Every time she was frightened, King Ian would scream and crawl into his arms. Lin shook her head. Having such a clingy sister is really a nerve-wracking thing. Lin An looked at the TV with a smile and said, "Would you like a gift? I can see the laws of things." Author, Yi Tiao Xuanhuan. Chapter 15. King Ian raised her head and asked curiously, "A gift? Brother, do you want to give me a gift?" Lin reached out and took out the beautifully packaged box and said, "Open it and take a look." King Ian looked at her brother's mysterious expression and felt curious. "What will my brother give me?" She sat up neatly, slowly tore open the package and opened the box. When she saw the blue dress inside the box, she was stunned. She unbelievably pulled out that incredibly beautiful dress. A moment. It's like the stars have lost their luster. King Ian's mind went blank for a moment, and she felt that her soul had been attracted by this perfect dress. This, she said blankly, so beautiful. Lin An looked at her dumbfounded look and smiled. Do you like it? King Ian felt that it was as unreal as a dream and exclaimed. I like it, I really like it. Lin An smiled and said, if you like it, put it on and have a look. It will be yours from now on. A few minutes later, King Ian put on the light blue dress and slowly walked out of the bedroom with bare feet. This time it was Lin's turn to be stunned. Looking at King Ian, who looked shy, had light makeup on her face, and was wearing that dreamy crystal dress, Lin couldn't find any words in her mind except the word absolutely beautiful. It's hard to describe in words. King Ian was already a beautiful girl who could score 10 points, but after putting on this dress, she was so beautiful that she seemed to be someone who shouldn't exist in this world. She has a delicate figure, a small face with a blush like milk, a cicada-like skirt that outlines her round waist, and a pair of long and slender legs, like jade. It is carved and exudes a faint light. She was so perfect and so delicate that people couldn't bear to touch her, as if she would break like crystal if touched. King Ian's face turned slightly red and she said softly, brother. Lin An came back to her senses and said with a smile, King Ian, you are like a little fairy now. You must be the most beautiful woman in Jianghai City. Anyone who proposes marriage to me in the future will probably cross the threshold of our family. King Ian sat on the sofa with a smile. She suddenly turned her head and stared at Lin An's eyes closely with her crystal-like eyes. Lin An could even touch the tip of her nose and feel her faint breath. Lin An was stunned for a moment. Suddenly, King Ian touched Lin An's lips like a dragonfly touching water, and said softly like water. Brother, I won't get married. A very bad atmosphere slowly grew and flowed between the two people. Lin An suddenly felt a little embarrassed and said, yes, after all, you are only 16 years old now. Let's wait until you grow up. It's so late. Ahem, let's go back and get some rest early. Lin An walked back to the bedroom as if fleeing. King Ian sat on the sofa, staring blankly at her brother's closed door, a trace of unfathomable loss flashing through her crystal eyes. Brother, you are such a big fool. Don't you understand yet? When I was seriously ill and dying, the person who saved my life with your own hands was you. Therefore, I don't want to be your sister all the time. Back in the bedroom, Lin lay on the chair and quickly calmed down the inexplicable mood in his heart. He shook his head with a wry smile. My sister is still the same as when I was a child. Little did she realize that she was now a slim girl. Lin shook his head and stopped thinking about these things. He turned to the bed and took out a rusty key from under the bed. Looking at the key, Lin's thoughts became a little dazed. Yes. 2 years have passed in a flash. He deviated from the way of the mage, and all the glory and memories he had had were sealed together with his atrophied legs. Now, though, it's time to pick it up again. Lin raised his head and used the key to open the bottom drawer of the bedside table. There was a box inside, covered in dust. Lin carefully took out the box and placed it on the table. After a moment of silence, he slowly opened the box. Inside was a solid gold badge, a book, and a photo. If anyone is here at this moment, they will definitely be shocked to see that the pure gold badge is the medal that represents the status of Grand Master. But unlike the warrior badge, that badge was full of magic. This badge is a golden medal that is awarded only to mages who have reached the master level. There is also a photo in the box. On the photo, there is a man and woman. The boy is very similar to Lin En, but he looks more youthful. Lin reached out and picked up the book in the box. Gently brushing the dust off the book, I saw 4 vigorous characters written on it. The secret law of heaven and earth. With the prefix of heaven and earth, and the name of mystery and magic, you can feel its grandeur just by looking at it. After Lin took out the books, he locked the box again. This skill book was a gift given to me by a former friend before leaving Jianghai City. A book she created by herself, which can draw the magic power of heaven and earth to infuse her body, so that her mental power can advance by leaps and bounds. Grandmaster level skills. But unfortunately, not long after she got this skill, she suffered a serious injury, her legs were disabled, and her life will was damaged. But now, everything starts again. Lin An sat cross-legged on the ground, flipping through the skills page by page. This skill is very wonderful. He was a magician before, so he knew very well the methods used by magicians to improve their mental power. Meditation. That's right, similar to the way warriors train their blood and chi, the magician allows himself to enter a state of selflessness and constantly uses mental power to train the soul. When the soul is strong, more mental power will be derived. But the training method recorded in this skill is different. It is no longer obsessed with itself, but directly draws the magic power in the world and uses the magic power of heaven and earth to forge the soul. This method is very dangerous, and the soul is easily destroyed. But at the same time, this high-risk training method also brings extremely terrifying benefits. If this secret book is put online, I'm afraid someone will pay millions to buy it at all costs. Lin An read the whole book, then he climbed out the window and left the community and came to the park outside the community. It was late at night, and there was still snow in early spring. Lin An sat cross-legged on a rock, closed his eyes, and began to sense the magic of heaven and earth. If someone was here at this moment, he would definitely be able to see that there was a faint glow like a firefly around him. That was magic, the magic of heaven and earth. Those magic points of light kept entering Lin An's eyebrows, nourishing his spiritual power. At the same time, on the watch-like instrument on his wrist, one value after another kept jumping. 500. 526. 558. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. I can see the laws of things. Author, Xuanhuan. Chapter 16. That instrument, like the blood gas tester, is an instrument specially used to monitor one's own mental strength. Almost every mage carries such an instrument with him to understand his own mental state. Lin was a senior mage 2 years ago. But since his life will was damaged, his mental power has continued to decline, and now his mage rank has fallen below that of a junior mage. The standard spiritual power of a junior mage is 5,000. The standard for an intermediate mage is 20,000. The standard for a senior mage is a terrifying 100,000 equivalent. Because the mage cultivates the soul, a fragile thing like the soul is much more difficult to cultivate than the body. Many mages became idiots and vegetative due to errors in their souls during their cultivation. It was actually not easy for Lin An to spend 10 years practicing to become a senior mage. Mental power is slowly growing. After a long time, Lin slowly opened his eyes and raised his head to look at the sky. Since I can use the will of law to increase the speed at which my blood energy grows, I should also be able to use the will of law to increase the speed at which my mental power grows. In an instant, Lin An opened the eye of law. Lin was immediately surprised to see that when he activated the magic of heaven and earth according to the method in the secret book, he also saw wheels of law one after another. Magic gathering. That's right, the moment he saw the Phelan, its name automatically appeared in Lin's mind. At the same time, Lin's heart moved. He looked towards his body. Suddenly he was surprised to see that there was a roulette similar to magic gathering surrounding him. However, that roulette is very crude compared to the law roulette in the sky, and that roulette is condensed using magic power, not the power of law. In an instant, Lin understood and he laughed. So that's it, I know. Lin An finally understood the principle of this secret book. The cultivation method in this secret book is just a way to use magic power to simulate the rough will of law of magic gathering, and then control the attracted magic power to forge your own soul. It's very simple, so simple that I even want to laugh. But for ordinary mages who cannot see the law, being able to explore this will of law is already very remarkable. That's right. In the mage system, any cultivation method and any magic are actually formed by simulating the laws of nature. They cannot see the will of law like Lin does. Therefore, we can only find out the construction method of a will of law through thousands of gropings and trial and error again and again. Then, use magic to build it? But Lin didn't need to bother at all. The method that others need to explore thousands of times to find, Lin An can directly see with his eyes. The whole world is the stuff of his magic. Lin An immediately abandoned the rough magic wheel. He opened his eyes of law and instantly stretched out his hand. Magic gathering. A faint shimmer slowly lingered between his fingers. A roulette wheel of laws quickly completed its shape in his hands. The moment he completed his construction, countless magic powers in the world seemed to be inspired and became restless. Lin smiled slightly. Is the effect of this will of law not obvious enough? Then use a few more laws to combine it. The effect of a single law wheel may be effective, but the combination of different law wheels can produce an effect that is greater than two. Lin's mind was racing. How can you find the will of law you need? Instantly, his eyes lit up. He stretched out his hand and made it into a fist, then slowly opened it. Suddenly, he saw a will of law emerging from his open palm. Expanded will of law. So this is okay. Lin An carved out the will of law with a smile, and then merged it into the will of law of magic gathering. In an instant, the will of law expanded instantly, and in that moment, it covered an area of several thousand meters in radius. The magic power within thousands of meters is summoned by the will of law. Although the scope has been improved, it is still not perfect enough. Lin raised his head and very skillfully carved out the will of law he used most frequently. Accelerate. The moment the will of acceleration was engraved, the magic in the entire sky surged instantly. It was like someone opened the floodgates, and countless magical powers burst out towards Lin. If other mages saw this scene, their jaws would probably drop in shock. Inspire the magic power within thousands of miles for your own use. Even a great master may not be able to accomplish such a heaven-defying method. Lin An sat cross-legged on the ground, calmly looking at the violent magic lingering around him, and said to himself, although the magic power has been attracted, if you use them directly to forge my soul, it is estimated that my soul will explode directly, right? Because magic is not spiritual power, because they are too explosive and they have too strong lethality. This rushing water must be turned into gentle still water. Lin once again had an idea. He slowly mobilized a trace of mental power and let it linger in his hand. He could control his own mental power at will, just like his own pet. When he was angry, he was angry. When he was not angry, he dared not be angry. Under Lin An's control, his mental power lay dormant in his palm peacefully. In an instant, Lin An saw a new will of law from his mental power. Peace. Lin An smiled slightly, constructed the will of law in an instant, and then engraved it beside him. Then, a shocking scene happened. The countless violent magic powers lingering around Lin An calmed down in an instant. The turbulent tide turned into gentle still water. If those high-level mages saw this scene, they would probably tremble in shock. If there is no extremely powerful force, it is simply impossible to calm down so many violent magic powers. If a mage wants to mobilize the magic power of the outside world, the first thing he must do is to use his mental power to erase the restlessness of the magic power of the outside world. Only by erasing the restless magic power can it be used for one's own benefit. And to erase the restlessness of magic power in such a large range, at least the same amount of mental power is needed to do it. Because if you make a mistake by mistake, the violent magic power will instantly backfire on itself. Let yourself explode and die. But Lin En doesn't need to worry about this happening at all. Because it is the law that makes them peaceful, then they have to be peaceful. Lin En immediately sat cross-legged on the ground, taking countless peaceful magic power into his body and nourishing his soul. His mental power continued to absorb the essence of magic power, and the value soared wildly. 897. 1232. 1543. 1859. Such a terrible cultivation speed, if other mages see it, I'm afraid they will be really amazed. Even if it is a genius, even if it is a real cultivation genius, it is impossible to achieve his level of improvement. In just less than 2 hours, his mental power recovered to 5,000. In 1 hour, he successfully reached the level of a junior mage. This terrifying speed is enough to make him a peerless person. I can see the laws of things. Author, Yitiao Xianyue. Chapter 17. Almost at the same time. On top of a skyscraper in Jianghai City. An old man with white hair, wearing a simple Zhongshan suit and a beard suddenly opened his eyes full of magic. He turned his head and looked at the sky in the distance, his white eyebrows wrinkled. Young lady. Did you feel it? The magic power within thousands of meters of Jianghai City has become abnormal. I have never seen such a large-scale surge of magic power. Behind him, a girl who looked only 13 or 14 years old walked over slowly, lying in front of the huge glass window, looking at the night sky in the distance. She was not tall, but her face was particularly delicate, with a delicate nose, light red lips, and soft facial lines. A pair of pupils like purple crystals were inlaid, and her long eyelashes trembled slightly. It looked like people couldn't help but want to marvel that there would be such a perfect creation in this world. But the strange thing was that although she was indoors, she was still wearing a thick mink coat and a velvet hood on her head. Except for that face, her whole body was covered in thick cotton clothes. The girl coughed lightly and said quietly, "It's not abnormal. There is a top magician who summoned the magic power of heaven and earth within thousands of meters." The old man in the Zhongshan suit was surprised and turned around and said, "Summon the magic power within 1,000 meters? This is impossible. I am already the peak of the Grand Master, but if I summon it, I will definitely not be able to control such a large range of magic." The girl looked at the night sky and said quietly, "Grand Masters can't do it, but top magicians above the Grand Master level may not be unable to do it." As soon as these words came out, the old man in the Zhongshan suit showed with a look of astonishment. He frowned and said, "Miss, are you saying that there is a Grand Master in Jianghai City?" The girl said deeply, "There are masters who are hidden in every place. There is no need to be surprised. Those strong people who stand in the open will never be the real strength of the city." The old man in Zhongshan suit bowed his head and said, "I'm taught you, miss." The girl took out a black mask from her pocket and slowly put it on her face, covering her nose and mouth, revealing only a pair of deep purple eyes. The eyes seemed to have a magic that made people sink. Once you look at them, you can never look away. At this moment, there was a knock on the door. A tall man in a suit and sunglasses walked in and said with his head down, "Miss, the 5 masters of Jianghai City and the master of the Martial Hall rushed here without stopping after hearing the news of your arrival. They are now waiting in the conference room downstairs." The girl picked up the black umbrella on the table and walked out the door calmly. "Let's go and meet them. We still need to refer to their opinions to evaluate the potential level of Jianghai City." "Yes, miss." Morning news report. Last night, the 5 great masters of Jianghai City represented Jianghai City and met with Miss Chen, the representative of the Chen family in Zhuzhou domain. The two sides held friendly consultations on the issue of evaluating the potential level of Jianghai City. It is reported that half a month ago, Zhuzhou domain issued relevant policies and decided to conduct a new potential evaluation of the 103rd level heavy cities in the jurisdiction. If the evaluation of the heavy city does not meet the standards, the city level will be adjusted to a county level heavy city. If our Jianghai city is reduced to a county level heavy city, it will be a huge loss for our Jianghai city. Lin An turned off the TV casually. The news broadcast on TV just now made Lin An fall into thought. Lin An certainly knew very well about the Zhuzhu domain mentioned in the news. Zhuzhu domain was an organization established by the first group of awakeners to rule the entire Chinese land 100 years ago, at the beginning of the spiritual energy revival and after the government collapsed. After 100 years of development, that organization has already controlled half of the country. They have the world's top combat power, countless warriors and mages with amazing potential and powerful strength. Even thousands of cities, including Jianghai City, are under the leadership and rule of Zhuzhu domain. And potential assessment is a policy issued by Zhuzhu domain not long ago. Combat power represents the current strength level of the city, while potential represents the future strength level of the city. If neither of them meets the standards, the downgrade of the city level will be inevitable. Once Jianghai City is evaluated as a county-level city, the benefits and resources that Jianghai City can enjoy will also be downgraded. This is also the reason for the panic of those senior executives. Lin An touched his chin and said, "It seems that Zhuzhu domain is going to get serious this time." Lin An shook his head and stopped paying attention to these things. He looked at the tester on his wrist. The value displayed above is 12,435. He smiled slightly. The training last night was very effective. In one night, he reached the standard of a junior mage. The mental power soared to 12,000. If he practiced for another day today, he would probably return to being a senior mage. Lin An turned and left the community and came to the park. There were few people in the park. Because it is located in a remote area, there are few people here even during the day. Let's start practicing. Lin An found a small forest, sat cross-legged on the ground, and quickly condensed the will of law. In an instant, countless magic powers rolled towards him. The values on his wrist began to surge again. 12,890. 13,437. 13,880. His mental power is improving all the time, and this terrifying improvement speed is rare even in the world. Jianghai City, inside the skyscraper. In front of the conference table, Jianghaiken's 5 supreme masters were all sitting in front of the conference table in a dignified manner. Everyone has gray hair and wrinkles on their face. They are the strongest in Jianghai City. 3 Grandmaster Realm Mages and 2 Grandmaster Realm Warriors. But at this moment, they all had gloomy brows and sad faces. Ms. Chen, is there no room for further negotiation? A Master Warrior raised his head and looked bitterly at the girl sitting at the head of the table, who was wrapped in a mink fur coat. She looked at the document in her hand with her purple eyes and said calmly, "Before I came to your Jianghai City, I made a detailed assessment of the current situation of your city." She raised her head and her voice was like the calm surface of a lake. "Although you have 5 powerful masters, you are already old and have insufficient energy and blood. In a few years, your energy and blood will decline and you will fall out of the master state." She looked at the document and said calmly, "Master of the Martial Palace, who is Zhang Heiran?" Zhang Heiran, who was sitting on the chair without daring to move, heard his name being called, and immediately stood up reflexively and said, "I am." The girl glanced at him and said calmly, "In this evaluation, you can be regarded as a bonus point for Jianghai City. If nothing unexpected happens, you will be able to break through and become a master within a month. First of all, congratulations to you, Palace Master Zhang." Zhang Heiran was overjoyed, and all 5 masters looked at him with affirmative expressions in their eyes. Now they are both prosperous and disadvantaged. Zhang Heiran's ability to become a Grand Master is definitely good news for Jianghaiken. But the girl raised her head, looked at them calmly, and said, "You young people in Jianghai City are very bad. I can see the laws of things." Author, Yi Tiao Xianyue. Chapter 18. As soon as these words came out, the expressions on the faces of all the masters froze. The girl continued, "There are less than 100 high-level warriors and mages under the age of 20, less than 50 extraordinary masters under the age of 30, and masters under the age of 40. She raised her head and said calmly, 0. As soon as these words came out, the whole audience was silent, even so quiet that you could hear a pin drop. The expressions on the faces of each master were very bad, but what she said was the current situation of Jianghai City. Zhang Heiran suddenly frowned and said solemnly, "Miss Chen, who said we don't have masters under the age of 40? What if I tell you that just yesterday, a 25-year-old master appeared in our martial arts hall?" As soon as these words came out, the other 5 masters opened their eyes wide in an instant, revealing a look of astonishment. A 25-year-old master? Could it be that he was the young man who blocked 4 cars on TV yesterday? Yes. Who said that there are no masters under the age of 40 in Jianghai City? Ms. Chen, your investigation report is not rigorous enough. That person is a genius among geniuses in Jianghai City. Who said that young people in Jianghai City are incapable? The 5 masters all echoed and were indignant. Although they had never heard any news about the young master before. But the 5 people stood up almost immediately. Whether it is true or not, if they can add some chips to Jianghai City, add more. Silence. A voice like thunder sounded. The peak power of the masters instantly spread throughout the conference hall. The 5 masters suddenly stiffened and sat on the chair, looking at the old man in the Zhongshan suit standing behind the girl with an uncertain and fearful expression. The girl raised her head, holding the document in her hand, and said calmly, "I have investigated the database of the martial hall. As far as I know, the young man only scored 120,000 in the last punch, but in the test of the first 9 punches, he did not reach the level of Grandmaster." There was no emotion in her voice. If we judge according to the normal process, the real strength of the young man should be within the scope of extraordinary warriors. As soon as these words came out, the hearts of the grandmasters present were half cold again. "Extraordinary warriors under the age of 30," the girl said calmly. "His potential is indeed very good, which is a plus point, but it does not affect my assessment of your Jianghai City's potential." A guru with a bad temper suddenly stood up, glared at the girl, and said angrily, "Even if he is not a grandmaster, he is also a 25-year-old high-level extraordinary warrior. Why, you said a good word, and wiped out the potential of this genius." The old man in the Zhongshan suit said lightly, "Are you dissatisfied with the rating standards of Zhuzhu domain?" As soon as these words came out, the faces of the grandmasters around changed. The grandmasters on both sides hurriedly pulled him, hoping that he would sit down and not speak rudely to the representatives of Zhuzhu domain. Anger can't solve any problems. But the grandmaster obviously would not give up. He sneered at the girl and said, "I have no dissatisfaction with Zhuzhu domain. I am just a little curious. Why did you send a yellow-haired girl to raid our Jianghai City?" As soon as these words came out, the grandmasters around were all shocked and pale. They secretly said that it was not good. The grandmaster said solemnly, "Then I want to ask, if the 25-year-old high-level extraordinary warrior is not a genius, then what is a genius? Please answer me, Miss Chen." The atmosphere around instantly reached the freezing point. No one dared to speak, and the atmosphere was already tense. The girl raised her head, looked at the grandmaster calmly, and said, "Do you want to know the standard of genius in my mind?" The grandmaster sneered, "That's right." The girl slowly picked up the document, and in an instant, a terrible cold power emanated from her body. The moment the cold power appeared, the faces of all the masters present changed drastically. They instantly felt that the temperature around them dropped by dozens of degrees in an instant, and even the ground began to slowly freeze, and even the glass was covered with frost. The master looked at the girl in great horror, and then sat heavily on the chair. At that moment, he only felt as if his blood was about to freeze. It was as if he was facing a ferocious beast walking in the ice and snow. The next moment, the cold power disappeared instantly, and everyone couldn't help but gasp, as if they had just experienced hell. They looked at the girl in fear. That kind of breath, how could that kind of breath appear on a 13 or 14-year-old girl? The girl looked at the document in her hand and said calmly, "This is my standard for judging geniuses in my heart, but unfortunately, I have traveled to hundreds of heavy cities, and I have not found anyone who meets the standard." She raised her head and said, "So, he is just very good." The whole audience was silent, and no one dared to make a sound. They looked bitter. Knowing that Jianghai City was relegated, it was already doomed. At this moment, a ripple suddenly flashed in the calm eyes of the girl. At the same time, the old man in the Zhongshan suit behind him suddenly turned his head and looked at the sky outside. He said in a low voice, "Miss, it's the one from last night." The girl calmly organized the documents and said, "I understand." Immediately, she raised her head and looked at the 5 great masters and said, "That's it for the meeting. I will stay in Jianghai City for 5 days and continue to evaluate the potential of your Jianghai City. After 5 days, I will distribute the funds to you Jianghai City's final assessment report." As soon as these words came out, the surrounding masters all showed expressions of astonishment. "Will you continue to stay in Jianghai City for 5 days? They had inquired, and once this lady confirmed a certain city's assessment, she would immediately issue a final report. But this time, she didn't do it as usual. Miss Chen Wu Dian stood up and said in astonishment, "Excuse me, is it because something happened that affected our assessment?" He was quick thinking and immediately realized the problem. The girl turned around calmly, put on her mask, and her voice came from far away. "A variable has appeared in your city that can affect the final rating of your Jianghai City." As soon as these words came out, all the masters showed extremely shocked expressions. Variables that affect final rating. After the girl left, all the masters fell silent, thinking about what she just said. Zhang Heiran slowly raised his head, his pupils trembling, and said, "Did you understand what she meant?" The surrounding masters raised their heads tremblingly, with expressions of ecstasy on their faces. There are undoubtedly only 2 situations that can affect the final report. Either a person with extremely powerful strength appeared in their city, and this person could even directly raise their assessment to a higher level. Either there is someone with such terrible potential that even the 9 provinces region has to pay attention to it, a genius among geniuses. This genius can also raise their potential assessment to a higher level. But no matter which one appears, for Jianghai City, this is an unimaginable good thing. If this is really the case. A Grand Master trembled. Did a peerless person really appear in our Jianghai City? Everyone was trembling in their hearts. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. I can see the laws of things. Author, Yitiao Xianyue. Chapter 19. Garden. Among the groves. Lin sat cross-legged on the ground, countless magic powers surging around him. The values of the instrument on his wrist continued to soar. 48,705. 49,153. 50,100. When the value soared to 50,000, the instrument instantly made a ding-ding-ding sound. Lin An suddenly opened his eyes, and the magic power surging in the sky calmed down instantly. 50,000 spiritual power. Lin smiled. Unexpectedly, only 8 hours later, he had already exceeded the 50,000 mark. From this moment on, he has officially become an intermediate mage. If others knew that he became an intermediate mage from an ordinary person in less than 2 days, their jaws would probably drop in shock. This is no longer a genius, this is simply a monster. Lin looked at her hands. He now feels that his brain is exceptionally clear, and the sensitivity of his 5 senses has increased by an unknown number of times. He could now easily see the gaps between the feathers of birds in the sky. The faintest sound of a mosquito flapping its wings can be heard from miles away. After his mental power is improved, his speed in constructing the will of law will be further improved. The power of the laws that can be used will also be extremely terrifying. He slowly stretched out his hand, and in a flash, a green will of law appeared between his fingers. The will of life. When the will of law appeared, all his fatigue was instantly swept away, and his whole body's energy was instantly restored. Lin An looked at the will of life in his hand and murmured. The effect and duration of the will of law have indeed become longer. If it were before, this will of law would only be able to last for a few minutes. Now, maybe a few hours will be enough. And he slowly pressed the will of life in his hand on a wooden stake next to him. It was a rotten tree stump that had been cut down for several years, leaving only the roots. But the moment he pressed the will of life on it, the tree stump actually slowly sprouted buds, and the dead bark quickly fell off, giving it new life again. If people saw this scene, they would definitely exclaim a miracle. This is the power of law. The effect of the will of law has become stronger. Lin An smiled slightly, turned around and walked out of the park. Think of this will of life as a gift to that big tree. And just at the entrance of the park, an old man in Chinese tunic suit and a young girl passed by Lin An. Lin An showed a hint of curiosity when he saw the girl who was wrapped up in a mink fur coat. She was wearing so many clothes now that the weather was getting warmer. She was really a weirdo. But he didn't pay too much attention, turned around and left. "Little miss, what's wrong with you?" the old man in Mao suit asked doubtfully. The girl turned her head, glanced at Lin An's back, and said, "Nothing, let's go in." The old man in Chinese tunic suit skillfully took out a black umbrella from behind and covered the girl's head from the sun. The two people stepped into the park. "The magic power has disappeared," the old man in the Chinese tunic suit frowned and said. "Maybe that person has left, but it's really scary. Today's magic power has been affected from a kilometer yesterday to a dozen kilometers. Is this still something humans can do?" The girl said calmly, "This can only show that that person has not revealed his true strength." The old man in the Chinese tunic suit took a deep breath, a trace of fear flashed in his eyes. Didn't he reveal his true strength? What rank is that person in? Grand Master? Or something even higher, the legendary master? That should be the center where magic power gathers. The old man in Chinese tunic pointed to the small forest, his tone a little solemn. What would happen if they really met that mysterious person and that mysterious person was going to be detrimental to them? Although the young lady is very strong, she is probably no match for that person. The girl walked slowly towards the small forest. There are traces of magic left here. Very peaceful. She slowly squatted down, looked at the ground with her purple eyes, and said, "That person seems to be using the magic power in the world to train his soul, and the effect is very good." As soon as these words came out, the Zhongshan old man's expression changed slightly. He looked solemnly at the girl's face and said, "Are you sure? But this method should only be used by young ladies in the world." He didn't dare to talk anymore because it involved some secrets within the Chen family. The girl was silent for a moment and said, "The world is so big, there are hidden dragons and crouching tigers. My sister is not necessarily the only one who can use the magic power of heaven and earth to temper the soul. And it is very obvious that this person's forging method is obviously a level higher than that of my sister. The Zhongshan old man's expression changed again. He knew that the eldest daughter of the Chen family was a well-deserved genius in the world, even though she did not awaken her destiny wheel until she was 21 years old. But with great accumulation, in just a few years, she broke through the Grandmaster and Grandmaster levels at an unimaginable speed, and became a legendary Grandmaster admired by thousands of people. The mysterious law of heaven and earth she created is even more praised as the pinnacle of the contemporary mage cultivation system. Countless mages in the Jiuzhou region regard her as the goal they will pursue throughout their lives. And the young lady actually said that this person's soul forging method is one level higher than the mysterious law of heaven and earth of the eldest lady. It's simply unimaginable. And at this moment, the girl's eyes moved slightly, as if she suddenly felt something. She turned around and looked at a big tree on the side of the road. In an instant, countless lights flashed in her calm eyes. The old man in the Zhongshan suit also noticed the strangeness of the big tree. In an instant, his eyes showed an extremely shocked expression. The big tree is growing. At a speed that can be seen by the naked eye, it continues to grow thicker and taller. One branch after another emerged from the trunk of the tree, and then slowly grew green leaves and white flowers. It was like a miracle of recovery. The old man Zhongshan was shocked and said, "Young lady, what is that?" The girl's eyes were shining, and she said deeply, "Let the dead tree be revitalized, sprout new buds, and even continue to support its growth." She raised her head and looked at the tree that was getting taller and taller, then took off her gloves, pressed her slender palms on the trunk, closed her eyes, and said, "This should be some kind of high-level life magic, or a forbidden technique that can make creatures burst into life, or..." She frowned slightly and opened her purple eyes. The old man Zhongshan asked hurriedly, "Young lady, did you feel anything?" The girl shook her head, with a rare look of doubt in her eyes, and said, "No, I guessed wrong. If it was magic or forbidden technique, I should be able to sense it, but..." She looked at the tree and frowned. "I didn't sense anything, just like this tree is originally like this." As soon as these words came out, the old man Zhongshan showed a look of shock in his eyes. "Even the young lady can't feel it? Just like this tree is originally like this? This is absolutely impossible. I can see the laws of things." Author, Yitiao Xianyue. Chapter 20. Anyone can see the weirdness of this big tree at a glance. How can any tree grow so fast? Could it be that? Old man Zhongshan frowned and said, "Did we all guess wrong? This tree was not made by that mysterious man." He suddenly seemed to remember something and breathed quickly. "Little miss, do you think this big tree is some kind of natural treasure?" During the time when the spiritual energy was revived, there were indeed examples of certain plants suddenly mutating into alien species. The girl frowned slightly and said calmly, "It is indeed possible, but what do you think is the chance of mutation in a park?" The old man from Zhongshan suddenly froze and was speechless. "That's right. This is just one side of a cobblestone path. If this big tree was born with a different species, people would have noticed it long ago." The girl said calmly, "But this possibility cannot be ruled out. This big tree is indeed a bit weird. You can transplant it into the space belt first, but I doubt that the reason why this tree grows so fast must be related to that tree." About the mysterious person, the old man in Mao suit asked, "Little miss, what are we going to do next?" The girl raised her head and said, "Keep waiting. I believe that the mysterious man will not only practice this time. Next time, I must see his true face in Lushan with my own eyes." After leaving the park, Lin did not return home. He took a taxi across the city and came to a huge martial arts venue. The martial arts venue is a place specially prepared for warriors and mages to practice martial arts and magic. 2 years ago, in order to work hard to improve his fighting skills, he came here to exercise almost every free time. The reason for coming here this time is not only to hone my martial arts and magic skills. By the way, I also want to meet an old friend. With that said, he strode towards the martial arts venue. But as soon as he stepped into the reception area outside the warrior hall, he was immediately attracted by the crowd of people watching from a distance. At the same time, he heard a very familiar voice among the crowd. He frowned slightly and walked towards the crowd of onlookers. I already told you. In front of the counter of the martial arts arena, a beautiful girl with long shawl hair sat in front of the counter and said calmly, "Mr. Qin, I already have a boyfriend, and it's my working time now. If you have nothing to do, please don't disturb my work." That girl was obviously the receptionist at this martial arts venue. She was wearing a pink professional suit, and her sexy figure was perfectly outlined by the suit. It really makes people wonder how that slender waist can support such an irritating height. She looks to be only about 22 years old, with light makeup on her face and a pair of eyes that are like pools of water. Even if she glances at you unintentionally, she will make you feel every trace of charm. In front of the counter, a man wearing a white suit smiled lightly and said, "Lele, you have used this excuse to me many times. I know your social circle and home address very clearly. You don't have a boyfriend at all." The girl named Lele's face changed slightly, and she gritted her teeth and said, "Are you investigating me?" The young man sneered, "Lele, you are a very special girl, so I don't want to use other shameful methods to make you submit, but I can tell you that you have almost worn away my patience." "Clean." Lele looked at him coldly. The young man adjusted his suit, raised his chin, and said with a faint smile, "I think you should know my background. My name is Xuanhuan. My father is the master of the Fire Law Hall. In the entire Jianghai city, apart from those 5 grandmasters, our Qin family is the largest." He narrowed his eyes and said softly, "So you have to understand, Lele, I am not a very patient person. If you annoy me, I can make you lose your job with just one word. Make you kneel down and beg me to take you." The girl named Lele had an angry look in her eyes. She gritted her teeth, trembling slightly with the anger of being humiliated. The young man appreciated the expression on her face, smiled slightly, glanced at her clenched fist on the counter, slowly stretched out towards her hand, and said with a slight smile, "Of course, Lele, it's not too late now, because I still have a little patience with you. If you seize the opportunity and perform well, the two of us will definitely get along happily in the next few months." The eyes of the people watching around him were filled with anger, and they all felt aggrieved in their hearts. But no one dared to stand up. Because what he said is indeed good. If he is really from the Qin family, then he really has the ability to make everyone present unable to survive in Jianghai city with just one word. But just when his hand was about to touch the girl's trembling clenched fist, suddenly, a young man in sportswear pushed aside the crowd, strode to Qin Wen's side, and punched him in the side of the face. Qin Wen only felt a gust of wind coming from his ears. He turned his head subconsciously, and a fist instantly enlarged in his pupils. His expression changed instantly. He wanted to stop it, but it was too late. Bang! There was a dull bang. The punch hit him in the face, and the huge impact sent his body flying for more than 10 meters, then hit the ground heavily, bounced up, and with a final bang, his back hit the wall. Superior! With a sound, he spat out a mouthful of blood. Standing not far away, several bodyguards in black suits who had just reacted to this huge incident quickly ran to Qin Wen's side and said, "Master! Master, how are you doing?" Everyone around them also showed shocked expressions. How powerful is his punch that he can actually punch someone more than 10 meters away? Moreover, he was beating the young master of the Qin family. I saw that young man wearing sportswear, with a light stubble on his chin, his eyes like deep pools, and the blood emanating from his body slowly disappeared. Lele raised his head in surprise and looked at the young man in front of him. She only felt that this man's face was so familiar. Suddenly, as if she remembered something, she stood up and said in surprise, "Lin, brother Lin N." Lin put his hands in his pockets, turned his head, curled up the corners of his mouth, and said with a smile, "It's me. Long time no see. It seems you are in some trouble." Lele immediately left the counter in surprise and trotted all the way to his side. She looked up and down Lin An in disbelief, with a look of astonishment on her face, and said, "Brother Lin. Is it really you? Your legs are not. Lin An smiled and said, "Of course I have recovered. Otherwise, why would I be here?" Her name is Wang Lele, and she is a good friend of Lin An's before. She used to follow him like a little follower, but now she still vividly remembers it. Compared with 2 years ago, she has completely lost her youthfulness and has now become a capable working woman. Lin An turned his head and glanced at Xuanhuan, saying, "Who is he?"